But mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying its power. Have nothing to do with them.
Hi, I'm Mark Keeler, CEO and executive producer for Cross TV. I'd like to take this opportunity to forewarn you, to brace yourself, because what you're about to see is hardcore truth. And viewer and parental discretion is definitely advised, because there are some very graphic scenes that we had to put into this 4-part series. But the point is, this is the kind of hardcore truth that much of the mainstream media would do everything they could to keep hidden from your eyes. In fact, this documentary is the result of years of research, compiled and narrated by Pastor Joe Schimmel, who before he became a Christian was himself a rock musician on his way to realizing that very lifestyle. And so he can testify to the validity of the truths presented in this 4-part special. You won't be seeing this information anytime soon on MTV, VH1, 2020, or even 60 Minutes, because we're going to go behind the scenes and examine the true history of rock and roll and many of secular music's most popular artists. And that means that we're going to be taking a look at some of the darker sides of those industries, particularly from a spiritual perspective that frankly usually doesn't get a lot of media attention. So stay with us as we go behind the scenes of the pop, country, and rock music industries and take a look at those associated with it and see for ourselves how they sold their souls for rock and roll.
In the Bible, in Romans chapter 1, beginning in verse 21, God describes how a human being can begin to commit some very dangerous sins and actually end up spinning downward, out of control, until he or she is turned over to horrible sins that they never really imagined they would ever be capable of committing, and consequences they would have never been willing to pay.
Yes, they knew about God all right, but they wouldn't admit it or worship Him, or even thank Him for all His daily care. And after a while they began to think up silly ideas of what God was like and what He wanted them to do. The result was that their foolish minds became dark and confused. Claiming themselves to be wise without God, they became utter fools instead. So God let them go ahead into every sort of sex sin and do whatever they wanted to, yes, vile and sinful things with each other's bodies. Instead of believing what they knew was the truth about God, they deliberately chose to believe lies. So they prayed to the things God made, but wouldn't obey the blessed God who made these things. That is why God let go of them and let them do all these evil things, so that even their women turned against God's natural plan for them and indulged in sex sin with each other. And the men, instead of having a normal sex relationship with women, burned with lust for each other. Men doing shameful things with other men, and as a result, getting paid within their own souls with the penalty they so richly deserved. So it was that when they gave God up, and would not even acknowledge Him, God gave them up to doing everything their evil minds could think of. They were fully aware of God's death penalty for their crimes, yet they went right ahead and did them anyway, and encouraged others to do them too.
I want you to make note. That downward spiral described in Romans chapter 1 can affect any human being who fails to put God first in their lives. It begins with setting God aside in favor of things you might find more interesting and enjoyable. God is no longer first in your life. That leads to having an ungrateful heart towards Him, to the point that you seek your pleasure and satisfaction in ways other than God and His ways, which is really foolishness, because it ends in bondage to horrible sins that you never imagined yourself capable of, and consequences you would have been unwilling to pay when you first thought that you'd just have a little fun. But things like sexual sin, and really sins of any kind, are simply things that are made to look appealing by Satan, but are forbidden by God because He is a just and holy God, and because He knows just how much sin harms us. And sexual sin, as we're about to see, is a classic example. Satan makes it look attractive, but if we only fully understood the price we'd pay, we'd never give it a second thought. But like so many sinful, harmful lifestyles, sexual sin is deceptively peddled by the rock and pop industry and portrayed in such a way that the youth of today are literally being scammed and lied to, as sexual sin is glamorized and made to look incredibly attractive. Well, in what you're about to see, that myth should be dispelled permanently. And, after watching this next piece, the myth that secular music doesn't usually glamorize sin, and especially sexual sin, should also go out the window, once and for all.
Like so many rock stars that promote the lie that sexual immorality will bring happiness, Limp Bizkit frontman Fred Durst is actually miserable. Through his music and videos, he is leading the youth of the world into a world of deadly illusion. Durst admitted, "I play the pimp thing on purpose, like when I'm on MTV. These chicks are fanning and massaging me." He says, "It's not like I attracted them off the street. We blank and hired them. I want everybody to be thinking I'm having the time of my life. But in reality," he says, "I'm, quote, single and miserable." Britney Spears emerged as the most celebrated female artist of the 21st century. Many parents felt that she was safe compared to artists like Madonna and Marilyn Manson. But is she really innocent?
I'm not that innocent. I'm not that innocent. I'm not that innocent. Go on and tell me how tight my skirt should be.
Sadly, Britney Spears' message to the young children is no better than that of the Spice Girls who came before her. Yes, Weekly said, quote, "She's still an eerie contradiction, a hypersexual Cinderella trying to combine Disney innocence with a touch of old-fashioned smut."
We're monster riding to the music tonight. A clever way to get
As Spears sings about riding to the music and having a wicked time until the end,
a wicked time to the end.
she leaves little to the imagination as to what she's really singing about. She sings about dropping and flexing until they break down the door.
A double it till we drop. We drop, we drop. We'll flex tonight until they break down the door.
It's not surprising that Britney Spears' record company, like that of the Backstreet Boys, keeps some of her most explicit lyrics off of the CD jacket. God's word warns that those who sin sexually actually sin against their own bodies. The word of God states, quote, "Flee from sexual immorality. He who sins sexually sins against his own body. You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your body." Underneath the veneer of popular bubblegum rock lie millions of venereal diseases that teens are catching every year. The rock fanzine Cream admitted of rock bands, quote, "There's gonorrhea, syphilis, crabs, NSU, venereal warts, and herpes. I mean, you'd simply be amazed at the number of times one has to go to the VD clinic. It's almost a regular stop for some groups on the way to and from a gig. The wallowing through the muck and mire of sleaze is all part of the rock and roll lifestyle." Incredibly, that statement was made when times were tamer before the public advent of AIDS. So deviant are many rock stars that the deviant, flamboyant Elton John said, quote, "There's nothing wrong with going to bed with somebody of your own sex. I just think people should be very free with sex. They should draw the line at goats." Now, incredibly, every single day in America, 4,219 teens will get a sexually transmitted disease, some of them fatal.
We can get on the streets, do whatever we want. I used to sneak out all the time. Then there was times that I wouldn't come home.